Then I had to affirm a statement that I was not going to try and proselytize my students. That's a big deal. That is the kind of thing that will get your ass thrown out of the country if you try to do it. Today's video is going to be a little odd because of the source I'm using is a channel and a video that doesn't directly deal with East Asia, but I think he may have inadvertently kind of stumbled into a China issue. Before I get to that, just very briefly, I did, hallelujah, find a channel that has more Chinese street interviews. The problem is the videos are really long. They're all over 20 minutes. Some of them are over 30, and I have a feeling you don't want to listen to an hour-long reaction, and I don't want to do one. So we'll find out how I'm going to, because I'm definitely going to use them, how I'm going to make use of those. But in the meantime, today's topic. Now, this comes from a channel called A Life After Layoff. It's operated by an actual recruiter, and it mostly concerns finding a job. Things like resumes, networking, spotting good and bad jobs, things like that. Skills like that that are pretty useful these days when you have lots of jobs being thrown at you. But recently, he did something that he does on occasion. He does what are more or less reaction videos, mostly to things that have been posted in places like LinkedIn. Things like the worst not job applications, but the worst jobs he's ever seen, like just ridiculous job postings. And here, though, he put in a job application that he argues is the most illegal one he's ever seen. Because on many, many points, this thing is flagrantly illegal by U.S. laws. The questions they are asking are absolutely against federal law. But he notes this is a job from another country. Doesn't mention what country it is. I suspect it's China. Could be a couple other countries. I think India is a real possibility too. But as we'll get into this, I full well believe that this application is for a Chinese company, and over there, not only are these questions fully legal, they're actually pretty standard. So we're going to get into what it looks like when you go in for a job over there. A lot of this comes not so much from me personally, it comes from talking to my adult students, because occasionally I'll also say, there's things that an American employer asks you that they're not allowed to, and then I'll go through the list, and then just one after another, they'll say, oh, that's standard over here. It's very common. So we're going to look at this. I'm going to be cutting this one pretty aggressively because only parts of it are relevant. So you'll probably only end up seeing about 5 minutes out of what's about a 15-minute video. So let's go ahead and begin.
It says, I was sent this pre-screen form to fill out for a US-based remote role. So this position was based in the United States, and it's a remote position. In theory, you could sit anywhere. The company itself is international. I don't think we know what company it is or what country it's from. Regardless, a company that is recruiting in a certain geographic area, in other words, it's a company that sits in, say, India or China or in Europe or whatever. If they advertise and solicit candidates from the United States, they still have to adhere to those rules and regulations, the laws of that particular country or domicile. Yes, this is a real form, and it was sent to him by this company's HR department. So again, for the fun of it, let's just kind of go through and we'll count how many illegal questions are asked in this span of 12 questions, or roughly how many they got here. So now number 4 is, what is your civil or marital status? And it says single, married, divorced, separated. Then even announcing that you have a significant other. I've never even heard of having to announce it, like you have a boyfriend, a girlfriend, etc. Significant other they want you to disclose. And then the best part about it is they say, add any comments if you want to give us any additional context, as if you need to discuss the fact that you got divorced or you're separated with some random employer that you've never met before, and have this discussion with them, share your deepest, darkest personal information with them. So obviously, asking marital status is completely illegal, has absolutely no bearing on the ability to do the job, and in the United States you can't ask this question. So again, assuming that this is let's just play along and say this is a legit employer, which I really don't think it is, but if it's a legit employer, this is absolutely going to be legal hot water for that question. So then they continue with this personal relationship stuff. I mean, of course, the next question is, do you have any kids? And if yes, how many minors?
All right. So, according to my students, all of the questions you've just seen are completely standard for China, at least when they're hiring women. I should point out in that country, a lot of jobs are gendered. There are many female only positions I've seen. Most of the ones I notice are public facing. People have told me that's true in most businesses, but not necessarily all of them. KTV is, I'm told, an exception, although all the KTV places I've seen, it's still mostly women working there. So, first point, if you have been to China and you've noticed that when you're in the hotel or you're dealing with any other services, catering to an English speaking crowd, it seems like there's a lot of women. That is on purpose. Now, these questions, again, obviously, I've never been asked these questions. My students tell me, the female students tell me, that when you apply to a job, they're going to ask three questions. Are you married? If yes, do you have a child? And if yes, are you planning to have another child? All of these are completely standard. It's very old school. And as he said, completely illegal in the US to ask questions like this. It is very standard over there. Now, I do have employers ask questions like this of me, but there's a much more practical reason for it, which has to do with getting a visa, which is if I did have a spouse and or children and I was going to bring them along, there'd be legal issues with that. So that's a slightly different case. I've never been asked this as a prerequisite for employment, but again, that is apparently very, very standard, especially for women in China. Continuing.
So then next we have, what is the passport? What passports do you hold, and nationality, and so nationalities. And then it says, is your passport currently valid for travel? Please include expiration date of passport. Now, on one level, there could be a requirement for international travel. Maybe you have to travel to China, and you have to be able to get into the country. So that could be, I guess, valid. Where the shade of gray on this one is, especially from nationality, is disclosing your national origin in the United States is an illegal question. So again, the question should be asked, this position will require you to travel to and from China on a regular basis. Are you able to meet that requirement?
So these questions are, again, a lot more standard when you're working overseas. In this case, this is, as he said, actually a remote position, so it shouldn't matter unless they're expecting travel to be necessary. But obviously, 6 and 6A, of course, I've been asked those many times. I need to be able to travel internationally because I live in the countries where I work. Question 7 is another one that really makes me think that this is China. As opposed to another country like, again, I said India is a possibility. This one feels like China because there are actually quite a few restrictions about who's allowed to live and work there, especially for certain jobs. For the work I do, if you technically these days you're only allowed to be from a handful of countries and do this work. So it is much, much more restrictive. And this is a much, much more standard question if you are working overseas. It's not just in China either. Korea is the same way. If you are teaching over there, you can only be from certain countries. Completely typical. Obviously a different issue here. Continuing.
Then the next one is age discrimination. They're asking for your age, and they say it's for visa purposes. Now, I don't know what the visa requirements are in other countries, and what their immigration statuses are, and how it works. And if the company's based in some European country and they're hiring somebody out of the United States, they have to be able to operate or to have an entity doing business in both places. And I'm thinking maybe there could be a valid reason for that in there.
There is in China because if you're over 60, you're not getting over there. They do have a standard retirement age in China. It applies to foreigners as well as natives. And there are ways around it. I know there are ways around it because I've had older coworkers. I had a coworker who was around 70. So all these restrictions, there are ways around them. Nevertheless, there are age limits on employment in China, presumably in other countries as well. Continuing.
Here, of course, the next one is religion, visa purposes. If the religion was different at the time of birth, please provide further details. So not only do they want to know what religion you are, but if you've ever changed religions or whatever your status is, basically they want to know every single thing personally about you.
Now, this is the one that really clinches it for me, this being China, although I actually want to hear in the comments if anyone who's maybe worked in other countries and other parts of the world can tell me, does this sound like a place where you've worked? Because this is definitely a China question. And here's why. Every single year I worked for a university, I had to sign a statement that, among other things, required me to declare my religious background. And then I had to affirm a statement that I was not going to try and proselytize my students. That's a big deal. That is the kind of thing that will get your ass thrown out of the country if you try to do it. They're very sensitive to this. I've known people who go over there and do missionary work, and most of them do not stay for the full length of their trip. So, yeah, it's not something I've ever seen on a form, but it is definitely something that they will ask at some point. Completely standard, completely legal in that country. Again, I would love to hear if the same is true in any other country where you've worked or lived or had friends work or live. Let me know, because when I saw that, when I immediately thought, oh yeah, this has to be China. Continuing.
Then the next is what is your height and weight? And I see these when I look at resumes, I should say, from India, from a lot of the Asian Pacific countries, some in the like in Mexico and in South America, I do see people self-reporting their age, weight, and marital status. So I'm starting to suspect if this is indeed a legit job posting, that maybe it's from one of those countries.
So I'll just say I've never personally been asked height and weight, but of course it comes up. There's always a medical requirement, has medical conditions there. That's perfectly standard anytime you're working in another country. In terms of listing height and weight, though, I have seen people list those pretty freely publicly in China. I don't know if there's specific requirements. There may be like a height weight proportional thing. They're going to, again, for public facing workers, something that, and I'm not an expert, seems like it's probably illegal here. I really don't know. But I will say I have, just to recap, I've never personally been asked these questions until it gets to a specific phase in the visa process when at the very least, height can become necessary. I'm not sure if I've ever been asked my weight at all. Continuing.
So, anyway, I thought this was a fun one to kind of go through. Again, I don't quite believe that this is a legit application, so it's a fun exercise to go through, and he seems to be getting a lot of people chiming in on the validity of this one. But if you're struggling in your job search and you're dealing with very low quality employers,
I think that's good. So, for the record, I have no clue if this application is for a serious job or a reputable company. Obviously, there are a lot of bad actors in that part of the world. I've worked for a few of them. But nothing in here is all that unusual. Like, none of these things are actually red flags for East Asia. One thing that didn't come up here, but which actually is standard over there too, is a picture. You are expected to attach a picture to job applications a large portion of the time. This is something I didn't even really think of until I was watching some more of my street interviews in Korea, and they mentioned that that's standard, which it is. And I've also, since then heard like American employers, when they do interview Koreans, they will just unbidden attach a picture of themselves because that is absolutely typical in that part of the world. So, yeah, cannot comment in the slightest on whether this is a legitimate job. I will agree with them that the application looks pretty wonky. I haven't seen one like that in a really long time. But the questions are not as shady as he seems to think they are. It's just Asia operates differently. They do not have our laws. They do not have many of our protections when it comes to employment. So that is my take. I would love to hear from all of you. I, in particular, again, want to know if any of you can maybe give me some insight on what the job application process is in other countries, because I'm wondering if this is India or Korea or any number of other countries, many of which I've never been to. So if you have any insight on that, I would love to hear about it. Until then, I hope, obviously this video a little bit different, I'm hoping you at least got some insight out of it. And that is it for today. So, of course, subscribe, comment, like, blah, 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 and I will see you on another day with another topic.